You know what they say, if someone's behavior is terrible in public, how bad can it be behind closed doors? What if that behavior is posted on the internet for millions of subscribers to watch in horror? For years, people have been trying to call out the awful parenting practices of Ruby Franke. And this week, she took responsibility and ended up turning against her business partner and potential cult leader, Jodi Hildebrandt. But it still begs the question, can you really take accountability if you have something to gain? Today, we try to answer this question. It's time to open a window and let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're brand new. My name is Erin and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I upload 2 or 3 videos a week on one of these topics, so if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell. I would love to have you here. Also, I was raised by a single mother, so I know how challenging this time of year can be. So, in each video this month, I'm sponsoring a single parent. This week, a single father reached out to me, but not for himself, on behalf of his friend who's a single mother, and I just thought that was so incredibly sweet. Now, his friend requested to stay anonymous, so I'm going to try to honor that and change some of the personal identifying information in this email. But don't worry, I have vetted this person personally, and I reviewed the email exchanges between the two of them, so I just want to be completely transparent about that. In his email, he wrote, "My name is blank, and I'm a single parent who has been raising 2 boys on my own for the last 12 years. But the person this is for is my best friend. She is a single parent of 2 wonderful kids. She's currently in the midst of a very messy divorce where she was a stay-at-home parent and the primary caregiver to both her children and her spouse. She was involved in a deeply toxic, abusive relationship, both emotionally and financially, for almost 15 years. She decided to take a break and step back a few months ago, and she left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her and her children's backs because he wouldn't allow her to take anything. Unfortunately, she's living in an area where the cost of living is very high, and she took what little savings she had, a little over $2,000, in a separate bank account, got an apartment, some secondhand furniture, some clothing for herself and her kids. All of this she's done over the last couple months with absolutely no help from the outside. She is incredibly smart. She has both an undergraduate and a graduate degree. But unfortunately, after graduation, she got right into this relationship, then marriage, and started focusing on her family. So she didn't have the opportunity to establish substantial work history, which is making things very difficult for her. I've watched her exhaustingly search for and cobble together any way to provide for herself and her kids. She's also constrained with childcare if work falls outside the school hours. But she recently did get a job that lines up with her kids' schedule, thank goodness. Obviously, with the holidays, going through a divorce, and all of the burden of this, she's doing everything on her own, and the monetary stress is just making everything feel unbearable, which is why I'm reaching out to you. I feel truly honored to know her, to see the way she's grown, stood on her own 2 feet, and stepped out from under the darkness that she was involved in for so long. It's absolutely inspirational. It really is. I thought I'd share her story, but by the way, I really love your videos. Thank you. Hope to hear back. Happy holidays. And I just said, I have to say again, what a good friend you are to help another friend in need. So anyone who wants to support her, you'll find her wish list in the pinned comment down below if you feel so inclined to help her out this year. And again, I thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get right into discussing today's topic, and trigger warning, we will be discussing harm done to children, so please use discretion before continuing watching this video. The internet was set ablaze earlier this year when a little boy was reported to have showed up to a neighbor's house looking malnourished, injured, and desperate to get help. The neighbor immediately called 911, his voice shaking, clearly disturbed by the state this 12-year-old boy was in. The police were called to the scene, and the little boy, referred to as RF to protect his safety and identity, was described as emaciated and still had duct tape around his wrists and ankles when the authorities arrived. When the little boy shared where he had come from, authorities were shocked to learn that he had been held captive at a nearby neighbor's house with his younger sister. When police went to the house, they found the little girl in similar condition as her older brother. The children were brought straight to the hospital, and their mother was soon identified as ex-YouTube mom Ruby Franke of the once wildly popular family vlog channel 8 Passengers. Some areas of the internet felt vindicated. Not that they wanted children to be harmed, but they had been suspicious of Ruby after seeing her very invasive videos on her 8 Passengers YouTube channel, a channel that once had 2 million followers before it was taken down in early 2023. Other corners of the internet were enraged, feeling as though all of this could have been avoided. See, people had been calling out her behavior for years on social media. Her channel had been started in 2015, and she'd quickly become a popular mommy vlogger. Apart from sharing intimate details about her children growing up, including exposing her kids' flirtatious text messages and sharing with the World Wide Web when one of her daughters started her period, she also shared some very questionable parenting techniques, including taking the doors off her kids' bedrooms if they misbehaved, taking away their beds, and having a cause and effect style of parenting. One popular example is when her daughter forgot to bring her lunch to kindergarten one day, and when the teacher reached out to Ruby asking her to bring a lunch, Ruby refused, stating that the natural outcome of forgetting a lunch is just that she would be going hungry. And then she posted on YouTube about how she hoped the teacher didn't feed her 6-year-old daughter because her daughter needed to learn this lesson. And honestly, if you'd like to hear more about some of these practices and abuses, the Dad Challenge podcast has been trying to call her out for a very long time, as well as Cece Suarez, Swoop, and several other commentary channels. I mean, there's honestly so many channels covering this at this point, examining her terrible parenting past. I'm just not going to go into too many details regarding that. Suffice it to say, it does make you question what else happened. What worse punishments were the children experiencing for years? Because Ruby wasn't just recording all this, in my opinion, abusive parenting content. She had to sit, re-watch it, then edit it, and then continued to upload it, and still thought that this was okay to share with the entire world. So honestly, you can't help but wonder what was happening when cameras were off. There's probably a lot more going on. But many of the creators who have been trying to call this behavior out for years have been enraged to hear of the condition of 2 of her children. I mean, perhaps if law enforcement had taken people's complaints more seriously, because yes, there were a lot of complaints. There had been petitions set up online, people calling CPS, and people calling the police to do wellness checks on the children. And it was just, allegedly haters complaining online. But maybe if these complaints had been taken seriously, maybe things wouldn't have escalated to this degree. On Monday, after being charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse, with 2 of those counts being dropped after she accepted this plea deal, Ruby pled guilty to the remaining 4 counts. The details of what these 4 counts entailed deafened the courtroom and outraged the internet. According to court documents, she subjected her 12-year-old son to overwhelming amounts of manual labor that included hours of wall sits, carrying large books up and down stairs and all around the house for hours, and working outside in the hot sun for so long that he got terrible sunburns, all while not being allowed to wear shoes. He was also forced to stay outside for days at a time, and his skin blistered from the sun exposure. He wasn't even allowed water, and he was punished when he tried to sneak a sip of water. While his mother and Jodi ate delicious, flavorful meals regularly, he got an extremely limited amount of food, and it was typically something very plain like unseasoned chicken and rice. He wasn't allowed any type of entertainment or electronics. This poor child wasn't even allowed to read books. It was May of this year when Ruby started physically harming her son herself. Apparently, she would force his head underwater and kick him while she wore boots. She even would cover his nose and mouth to cut off his oxygen. Why? Well, she and her friend slash fellow child abuser and potential cult leader, Jodi Hildebrandt, who we are going to talk about a little bit later, they were trying to convince this little boy that he was evil and he was deserving of his punishment. They tried to convince him that they were doing this because they loved him, that these were just acts of love, and he needed to submit and obey so that he could repent his sins. What? But RF, her son, who is just 12, still wasn't buying it. He was able to rise above and he tried to escape in July. But unfortunately, this escape attempt was unsuccessful, and so as a punishment, he was tied and bound. Sometimes he'd be attached to his mother Ruby so she could keep an eye on him, and other times he would be tied to heavy weights. It's reported that at one time he had even been hog-tied with handcuffs and duct around the handcuffs. It's just such a disturbing visual. And unfortunately, it gets even worse. The restraints created injuries, obviously, and they cut deep into his skin. But do you think he was treated by a doctor? Of course not. He was treated with homeopathic remedies that may have included cayenne pepper on gauze, and oh my gosh, that sounds so incredibly painful. Cayenne pepper is spicy alone when you eat it, and sources have said to not put it on an open wound. It must have just been so excruciatingly painful. And you may be wondering, why was no one intervening? I mean, her YouTube channel was called 8 Passengers, so there must have been 8 family members who should have called out this bad behavior. Well, his older siblings had been estranged, and his father had been kicked to the curb, too. Apparently, his dad was supposed to be giving Ruby space if he wanted to save their marriage, so he hadn't been around for most of 2023. So, without any intervention from their family, unfortunately, she would subject the 10-year-old daughter to the same punishment because she too was evil and needed to repent. It's honestly, it's too horrible to really believe. I truly don't understand how you can see these young children who you brought into this world as evil creatures. And I'm not a mother, but to me, children are so innocent. They're learning how to exist in a big, scary world, and they deserve to be nurtured and gently cared for. But unfortunately, in cults and cult like groups, we see a much different perspective. Children are not often thought as children who need teaching and guidance. In many cults, they're just an extension of their parents, or in some groups like Scientology, they're considered to just be small adults, so they're treated like small adults. They're expected to behave like adults no matter how old they are. In other groups, like the FLDS, children are married off as young as 12 years old to men as old as 70 or 80. And in some groups, they aren't allowed at all. They're unwanted because they might distract the adults or their parents from doing the good work within the cult. Some parents have even been coerced to leave their children behind to go join the commune because, again, children are just a distraction to them. In Ruby's case, apparently, she had always believed in a very strict style of parenting where punishments were doled out like candy should be. So I can't help but wonder if these extreme practices just didn't seem extreme to her. It's honestly been really confusing hearing her defense because she's stood so firmly in her parenting practices for so many years. Leading up to her plea agreement, her lawyer stated that she had reflected and now recognizes that her moral compass had been altered, and that's the only way she could have ever harmed her children, even though her pattern of behavior would prove otherwise. I mean, knowing her history from the videos that she used to post online, it's been really difficult to hear her when she blames her business partner, who she was involved in this group Connexions with, and people are starting to call Connexions a cult. The group was led by a woman named Jodi Hildebrandt. In a statement to the press, Ruby's lawyer stated that due to prolonged isolation, Ruby was, quote, subjected to a distorted sense of morality shaped by Miss Hildebrandt's influence, unquote. He claimed that she had been isolated from her older children, extended family, and even her husband, and this is what caused her to go down this destructive path. And that may very well be true, She was apparently living with Jodi, and the children were found emaciated in Jodi's home, not Ruby's. But I'm sure a lot more details will be coming out regarding this case in the coming months, so I don't want to speculate too much as this is still an active investigation. However, it does beg the question, if you are so heavily involved in a group that some are calling a cult, can you really play the victim now? Is Ruby Franke a victim turned perpetrator? Or is she a co conspirator alongside this woman, Jodi Hildebrandt? Or was she truly manipulated and led astray by a woman she thought she could trust? Well, in order to even attempt to answer that question, we need to learn a little bit more about Jodi. Jodi Hildebrandt is a long-standing member of the LDS, or Church of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as Mormon. She also became a licensed professional counselor in Utah in 2005 and was frequently recommended by the high ups in the church, usually to couples in need of guidance. She was like the Mormon go to couples counselor, so to speak. And now, if you're familiar with the Mormon religion, it's very common for members to report on one another. Similarly to cult groups, Mormons are encouraged and expected to report other members' wrongdoing to the elders or the bishop of the church, and the person committing the wrongful act will then be punished. Now, this is not only used as a way for cult leaders to keep tabs on their followers, but it also creates this fear among members. I mean, who can you really trust? This doesn't really work if you're a counselor, though, because it's illegal to share a patient's confidential information. So, when Jodi decided to share a client's struggle with an alleged porn addiction with a high up at a Mormon university, and her client was then ejected from that university, he was rightfully enraged. He'd never had or been diagnosed with a porn addiction because it wasn't even recognized as a diagnosis by the American Psychiatric Association. So her client reported her, and her license was put on probation in January of 2012, but it would later be reinstated in August of 2013. And sometime between then and now, she created Connexions, a self-help program slash website where she claims she can help you empower yourself and enjoy your life again. There's really not a lot I could find about her since then and now, and how exactly she met Ruby is currently unknown, but her website definitely raises some red flags for me. I mean, first of all, according to her LinkedIn, it was created back in 2007, but according to her website, it's brand new this year, and people have been alleging that she co created it with Ruby Franke. She also seems to reject her education as a psychotherapist and claims to have discovered the right way to help people radically change their lives. And guess what? It's not by seeing a licensed counselor, according to Jodi. On her website, she writes, "Hello, I'm Jodi Hildebrandt, MS, your mental fitness and relationship expert. I've spent over 25 years working with people just like you to help facilitate powerful and positive change. I began practicing in the psychotherapy world, and my patients were not healing." Maybe you're just not a good therapist, Jodi. Why are you blaming psychotherapy as a whole? When I began empowering people by educating with principles of truth, learning to be honest, responsible, and humble, I saw my patients radically change right in front of me. You don't have to be a victim to your circumstances or the people around you. You can have the life you want, but you must first dispose of distortions, ugly lies, in order to live in truth, connection, and freedom. Start your training with Connexions to work on the foundations necessary to uncover the truth. You have the power to make positive and long-lasting changes that can transform your life and completely change the path you're on. She literally claims that Connexions is the solution to distortion. So what is distortion? It's just like every other cult. It's the same as Mother God calling people who live in the 3D world as living in illusion. Ooh. And Jeff Devine of Twin Flames Universe claiming that if you don't use TFU to help find your twin flame, you are basically living in hell. It's literally just another word for the same thing. Anything outside her cultic belief system is distortion, and anything within her belief system is truth. And I just love it when someone claiming to have a solution also just invents the problem. Like, hey, I'm just trying to hire you because I'm having trouble in my marriage. And she's like, oh, you're in distortion. And you're like, oh, I just want to communicate with my husband. She's like, you have to get rid of your distortion. And you're like, I don't know what distortion is. And she's like, well, you're asking that question because you're living in distortion. And if you weren't in distortion, you would see that you're in distortion. And you're like, what? What is this? So, what is distortion? Seriously, what is distortion? Well, you might be living in distortion if you're addicted to something, but not just alcohol or other substances, but you could be addicted to your hobbies, work, shopping. You could be addicted to your spouse, receiving compliments. You could be lustful or you could be manipulative. Like, Jodi, seems like you're just living your life in distortion with how it sounds like you've been treating people. So, how do you know that you're not living in distortion? Well, you're impeccably honest, you take rigorous personal responsibility, and you practice humility. So, yeah, sounds like she just wants to control you. Because if you're always honest, you might share an inner truth with her, thinking you can trust her, and boom, she has collateral on you that she can use to your detriment, just like she's done to clients before. You take rigorous personal responsibility. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't turn into her forcing you to take responsibility for things that weren't actually your fault. It's the equivalent of Jeff Devine's mirror exercise, or the equivalent of Keith Raniere saying, well, if you're resistant to what I think you need to work on, it must be a you problem. So everything is going to be her client's fault. Nothing will ever be Jodi's fault. And good luck if you ever try to question her. So, why are these three principles so important? Well, because without practicing them, you'll never be able to truthfully connect with others. So, it's imperative for literally all of your relationships to do what Jodi tells you. If you want to have a positive relationship with your family and friends, you can't be in distortion and neither can they. Because if they also don't learn how to not be in distortion and don't learn these truths from Jodi, then you'll never be able to truly connect with them. You have to always be honest, take responsibility, and move with humility. And it's just really frustrating that she is basically demonizing psychology and psychologists and making it look like her way is better. I mean, some of the most solid ground I have to stand on as someone who is basically an anti cult activist is encouraging people to go seek therapy from a professional. And here we have a professional claiming, oh, that doesn't work. You got to do it my way. And it's just so incredibly frustrating and it's so incredibly manipulative. And according to Jodi's own practices, being manipulative means that you are living in distortion, which means you're not living with honesty, taking responsibility, and living in humility. So, Jodi, stop being such a dang hypocrite, maybe? So, what does Jodi's Magic Connection program look like? Well, it looks like paying thousands of dollars to be in group meetings with Jodi and other clients once a week. And if you feel like you're in distortion throughout the week when you're not in meeting, well, you need to call the other group members. Then, in group, you have to share how many calls you made that week, and then you're shamed by Jodi for how many times you've been in distortion. What if you want to speak directly with her, one on one? Well, that's not included. You have to pay extra for that. So you just work with your distortions with other clients. Like, imagine having a therapist and trying to call them and be like, hey, I'm having a rough day. And they're like, you know what? I'm just going to give you Brenda's number. She's got anxiety too. So you can just like talk it out with her. Like, what? I don't think that's what I'm paying you, the professional, for. And apparently, this woman was profiting a whopping $30,000 a month for collecting clients and getting her clients to counsel with other clients. So she could, like, I don't know, go make YouTube videos with Ruby Franke about abusing children and then tie those children up in the basement. Like, what is this woman thinking? She has way too much time on her hands. I'm getting a little heated right now. But honestly, I did not know what to expect going into this topic, and it's been very frustrating for me to uncover all of this. So, anyways, as a client, you're busy talking on the phone multiple times a day with the people in your Connections family that by the time you try to communicate with your real loved ones, you have this strange new cult vocabulary that they just don't understand. But since they don't understand, that means that they are in distortion and you're encouraged to isolate yourself from them because heaven forbid you get any other outside information or someone calls you out for this strange new language that you're using. And what's even crazier is most likely you're all already part of the same church or community. Jodi is the Mormon go to counselor. You trust her. She's been recommended by your church. You believe what she's saying is true. It's being backed up and supported by your bishop. She really hasn't had to do any work to really coerce you because everything around you is reinforcing what she's teaching you. And if you do find yourself resisting something she teaches, then guess what? You're living in distortion, and I guess you need to pay more to keep working through it. It's really just a lot of back and forth and mental gymnastics. But so far, she's really checking off all the cult leader boxes. She thinks she has a secret to solving everyone's problem. She's money driven. She's trying to control people's behavior. She's isolating people from their family members and loved ones. I mean, she's morphing how people speak to each other, how they identify. She's planting this seed that if people question any of her teachings, they're just resisting their own growth. And she's creating this threat of punishment if people don't follow her rules. And although she's Mormon, she's also effectively elevating herself above the church officials and leaders, claiming that she's an oracle, that they need to learn what she teaches, otherwise, they are in distortion too. Everybody is in distortion. But luckily, people have been speaking out against her, even before her arrest. So much that at one point, she went on social media to beg for positive reviews. Because here's a sampling of some of the reviews and testimonials from real people who were involved in her group. I wouldn't trust this company. They use brainwashing tactics to manipulate you. They intentionally make you feel bad about yourself and use slander. Please stay away from this company at all costs. They are a scam. Another reads, I have a different history with Jodi than most. I am a pretty well-known therapist that was trained under Jodi for a year. As I was trained under her, I saw her tear apart families and destroy relationships. I believe that she is evil, and I don't say that lightly. I have done so much therapy for people coming out of her cult who were traumatized by her therapy. I don't have an axe to grind, but I am tired of watching people get hurt by her work. I'm reluctant to speak out against colleagues and other therapists. However, I wouldn't mind somehow, some way, helping people see that she is dangerous. Another reads, she will ruin your family through mind control. They don't want you to think for yourself and critically think. They want to shelter you. They are an actual cult. An actual cult. And I think they is referring to Ruby and Jodi. Another reads, I have grave concerns about the organizations called Connections Classroom and Moms of Truth. My husband and I took the first course for couples and benefited from being reminded to not tell ourselves unhelpful or untrue stories and to invite one another to listen when we feel we have another perspective to share. We are grateful for the correct principles we were reminded of through the course material. There were some serious red flags we witnessed while taking the course and through subsequent exposure to Connections. I recognize that there is a need for helpful counseling to heal relationships, but destructive division is actually what Connections is perpetuating. The biggest problem I see is that Jodi and Ruby do not use the principles they purport to teach. Instead of golden rule type language and patient understanding interactions, they often harshly and forcefully shame and batter people down in a brash and cruel manner when they ask questions or have concerns, though they are very kind to those who agree with them. In all fairness, Jodi appears to have started off her career with noble intentions, but those intentions are all called into question by past and current professional peers who see her methods and manners as emotionally and mentally detrimental, even abusive. Ruby, who is known by many for her role as a YouTube influencer and person trying to help families succeed at home, is a gifted and intelligent woman. But something has changed. For example, Jodi and Ruby seem to think themselves synonymous with truth, always written with a capital T, which makes it appear that there is some kind of God complex going on, and it gives off the warning signs of a cult like mentality. Ruby and Jodi quickly make judgments about a situation without knowing or seeking to know enough of the details, and have been known to reflect truth by saying, I feel sorry for you. It is obvious that you are lost. Your anxiety, depression, or unaliving tendencies are a result of not taking responsibility for your feelings. Your children have no right to privacy. I recommend you kick your daughter out regardless of her serious heart condition, etc. The tone and way these mothers treat people and give advice commonly goes against nearly every principle taught in professional psychology, counseling, teaching, and mentoring. It is painful to watch and heart-wrenching to read about, knowing that desperate or faithful followers may very well follow their counsel. I feel obligated to warn those investigating Connections or Moms of Truth to be aware that these women have become master manipulators who are experts at pulling vulnerable individuals in, making them doubt themselves, their spouses, children, siblings, etc., until one day they realize their own family relationships have disintegrated. Please look closely at the lives and families of Jodi and Ruby and talk to their family members, immediate and extended, before jumping into any counseling or training with them. The expectations and principles they set on young kids whom are still learning and making mistakes is horrible. You're not perfect, so don't expect your children or other kids to be. Highly don't recommend following these two. It'll just make your kid's life depressing. Just look at YouTube about the honest bad reviews about this so-called business. Some examples of parenting advice includes telling a mother to remove a 13-year-old from their home. If the mother did not remove the child, she was told to isolate the child from the rest of the family, and 2 days after his 18th birthday, kick him out of the house. They called a single adoptive mom selfish, telling her she was selfish and did not think of creating a strong foundation for the child before adopting, because she's a single mom. They also say that children do not deserve any privacy, a bed, or a bedroom. In their opinion, children don't have possessions. Everything a child owns in your home belongs to you, the parent. If a child has earned money, they have no right to it because it belongs to the parents. The advice that is the most destructive is given by Ruby Franke from the YouTube channel 8 Passengers. Ruby exploited her family for years and made a lot of money by doing so. She has videos about her daughters' periods and shaving their legs. She gave her children no privacy and is now giving parenting advice. Before giving this company your money, you need to really research who they are and what they believe in. So that was a lot of awful reviews, and you're probably hearing these terrible accounts and wondering, okay, so what exactly is Moms of Truth? Moms of Truth seems to be where Ruby really begins to get involved. It seems to be a parenting advice offshoot of the Connections program and is basically parenting using the Connections principles and then doling out incredibly harsh punishments on children who are or remain in distortion. Ruby became so involved in this venture that she became a certified mental trainer within the group. And it seems that she just abandoned her 8 Passengers YouTube channel completely. And it seems she not only abandoned her YouTube channel, but eventually even her husband. Apparently, he must have been living in distortion, and I'm guessing this is when she went to live with Jodi, with her 2 youngest children. And for about a year, her husband respected her wishes to keep his distance, but it's like, those are your children. Legally, you need to see them. And if not seeing them, connecting with them to make sure that they're safe. But I suppose that's just my opinion because he was also on the 8 Passengers family channel talking about the way that they punish their kids. So it's so hard to hear his claims and Ruby's claims all being blamed on Jodi. But at the same time, she also seems to be a cult leader. So I don't know. It's just really confusing. And so Ruby is starting to join Jodi on this venture. They shared some really intense, seemingly abusive parenting advice in their private Facebook group and in videos, and it all just feels so slimy to me. So not only is Jodi scamming people to sell these BS coachings on how to get out of distortion and then bringing in Ruby Franke to teach people how to be a good parent, and then you're sharing these incredibly abusive parenting practices and you end up tearing families apart and you take no responsibility until you get arrested? It's just so incredibly disturbing, and thank goodness this group has gotten shut down because without Jodi and Rudy at the helm, people can't book these so-called services, thank goodness. As grateful as I am that people have seen the truth on a massive scale, I can't help but feel heartbroken that people's concerns were ignored for so long and victims' claims were just basically cast aside. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of this might not have happened if people's concerns had been taken seriously over the last 7 to 15, yes, 15 years. You see, Jodi's niece came forward in recent months claiming that 15 years ago, they had tried to alert the family and authorities because Jodi was actively abusing them. They claimed to have been duct taped, isolated, and emotionally and physically and psychologically abused. That Jodi would often tell them that they were evil and are dangerous to other people, making this person feel afraid to connect with other humans. I mean, can you imagine being a teenager and hearing this from someone who is supposed to be taking care of you? Just because you're a rebellious teen, you're just acting like a teenager. It's so sad. They were literally also not allowed to respond when spoken to. And they were forced to sleep outside in the snow. They claim that Jodi will actively try to ruin you and your reputation if you ever speak out against her. And it's truly so heartbreaking to hear that Jodi's niece tried to expose Jodi for so long and no one listened. But I'm really hoping that this whole situation has been a little validating for them so that they can move forward more positively. There's truly so much in this case, and honestly, when I first set out to research it, my hypothesis was that Ruby was more of a perpetrator than she was claiming to be in court, and that her and Jodi should share equal responsibility when it comes to the abuse they inflicted on those poor children. But now I'm a little torn. Of course, I still believe that Ruby deserves prison time for how she treated her children, and luckily, all 4 counts that she claimed guilty to, they each hold a maximum of 15 years, and they could be served consecutively. So that could end up being up to 60 years in prison. But I'm also starting to get a little more convinced that Jodi did have a very bad influence on her. And since Ruby already had what I believe most of us would describe as distorted, ironically, beliefs about how to raise and discipline a child, I think that Jodi reinforced that, and together it was like a hurricane becoming a tsunami. They just enabled each other and made each other even worse. In my opinion, Ruby was almost like the perfect target. She already had very dogmatic beliefs, and Jodi thought she could use Ruby's internet fame to grow her endeavor. But Jodi was also the gasoline to Ruby's fire, so the two of them together ended up being explosive. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out, but it is clear that neither woman is innocent. I really hope that this case can set some kind of precedent about parenting, religion, and even cult dynamics, and hopefully stop future abuses from occurring. I also hope that this helps law enforcement take more public complaints more seriously. I mean, this is one of the most highly followed cases in America and on the internet right now. And when it comes to the fight against cults and cult mentality, the more people become aware the manipulation tactics these people use, the better. So I really hope this helps people become aware of the dangers of really just not trusting anyone with your brain, especially if they're claiming to be a part of the psychology community and then they are basically casting it aside. It is just so heartbreaking and frustrating. Now, when it comes to children on the internet, they do not technically have the ability to consent to the content being posted online. And yet, the parents are profiting off them being on the internet. In the United States, unfortunately, there are zero protections in place for these children. And apparently, when you alert the police to potential abuses, they may not take it seriously. But luckily, some states, like Illinois, are enacting child influencer laws. This law, effective July 1st, 2024, in Illinois, will require that a child under the age of 18 be compensated 30% of the earnings that a parent makes from featuring that child in the content. The money must be put in a trust for the child to receive at 18, otherwise, that child has full right to sue their parents. And I, for one, think this is a great thing. It is very important that children are protected, and I think it's honestly sad that we live in a time where we can't just trust the people, the parents, who we expect to protect their children, instead exploit their children. And I really hope that more can be done on a federal scale, not just from state to state. Well, everyone, thank you for going on this long journey with me today. I really appreciate your time, support, and attention. And I hope it brought some more understanding to this really complicated situation, because I know I was feeling a little bit lost about what exactly was going on with these channels and connections and Jodi. And the media is really focusing in on Ruby because she's the name. But we just cannot forget about this wannabe cult leader Jodi and the terrible things that she has done to people, whether they're children, adults, or families. They've both gotten away with this behavior for far too long, and they both deserve, in my opinion, to be put away so that they can think about what they've done. With that, please do not forget to check out the pinned comment down below if you'd like to help out our single mom this holiday season. She's one of the last ones I'm featuring on my channel before Christmas, so please, if you can, help her out. And I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week. Be kind to each other, ask questions, and thank you again. I will see you very soon. Thank y'all so much. Bye.